Welcome everybody, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Understanding the Journey to the Cloud. Digital transformation is one of the biggest challenges facing businesses of all sizes today. The cloud promises so much: pay-as-you-go access to enterprise class software and services, the ability to rapidly scale infrastructure and applications, and cost effectiveness. However, it is all too easy to move everything to the cloud and find out months later that it's not only costing more than a typical private cloud or even on-premise environment, but that some governance and cost control is required, which can result in shadow IT practices being put in place by internal IT teams. Today we're going to look at all the steps that you need to take to migrate to the cloud successfully so you don't run into these roadblocks and these issues. Let's look at today's agenda. We're going to start by looking at an overview of digital transformation, followed by what cloud adoption roadblocks you need to be aware of. What does security look like in the cloud? What does a successful cloud migration look like? And how can the partnership between Microsoft and Synoptek help you on your cloud journey? Introduction to today's speakers: Miles Feinberg, VP of Service Development from Synoptek, and Manish Dal, Cloud Solutions Strategist from Microsoft. So we're going to start by handing it over to Miles today. Miles, over to you.
All right, thanks, Tyler. Take a close look at this picture. I wonder if anyone knows what it is. There's clues here. And before this webinar is over, we'll clue you in as to why it's relevant to our seminar today. Use of the cloud promises many things: to purchasing resources efficiently only when needed, not for capacity up front for 3 years, to the flexibility to scale up and down when needed. It refocuses a company's personnel from buying, racking, and cabling to higher level functions like ensuring applications are set up optimally and performing. And ultimately, it opens the door to transforming the business by adopting services only available in the cloud, like platform as a service and business intelligence. Organizations that were once giants in their industries have fallen by the wayside, and at the same time we see these startups becoming billion-dollar unicorns in just a couple of years. It used to take 20 years to be a billion-dollar valuation company, and much of this is driven by taking advantage of the technological innovations, predominantly cloud. However, to achieve that cloud promise, you have to embark on a digital transformation journey like the one depicted here. Starting from the left, this requires a collective understanding of cost and performance metrics, licensing or technical constraints, and maybe skill gaps in your organization. To successfully migrate to the cloud has natural prerequisites in assessing and planning. So naturally, business leaders have questions aplenty for their teams. Leadership's looking for well-measured and reasoned answers to these kinds of questions. And a timeline. Does this sound familiar to anyone? What platform are we going to use? What's the timeline for our cloud initiative? What's it going to cost to run? Are users going to be affected and notice this? However, getting these answers means first overcoming a kind of organizational inertia. In fact, this is one of the biggest challenges. Staff have concerns about what this means to the skills they've invested in, for which the organization currently values them. Further, there's these unfounded assertions we've all heard and beliefs that surface without really researched data. And lastly, because this is so new and there's so many unknowns, there's this analysis paralysis. And I wonder if any of you here in this webinar can relate to this from your own organization. So this leads us to the 3 challenges to cloud adoption. Specifically, lack of skills, concerns about security, and confusions on cost. So let's explore these 3. So there are genuinely new skills that are now needed, such as auto-scaling, containers. 83% of organizations recognize that cloud skills are vital to their transformation. Unfortunately, 2 in 5 firms report they simply can't hire the cloud skills they need. So let's move on and look at security. The average organization today generates about 2.7 billion unique transactions in their on-premise service or in cloud today. These are things like user logins, file uploads, document edits, and so forth. And with this volume of transaction data, it would be impossible to manually search through an audit trail of activity to identify potential threats. So in response, organizations are investing in tools which use machine learning to identify anomalous events against the background of noise of everyday activity. And even with those tools to cull through events, you're going to reduce that down to about 2,500 anomalous events each month to investigate. And some examples of what anomalous events are, like when a user logs in from 2 locations in a very short period of time, or logs in at an unusual time, or maybe a machine does something unusual itself, like a port scan. So then at the bottom of this funnel, those 2,500 turn to about 23 threats per month. That's representing less than 1% of the 2,500 anomalous events to be actual incidents to take action on. So even if you're lucky enough, fortunate enough, to have security professionals on staff, they're suffering from alert fatigue. Half of enterprises have 6 or more tools they've purchased and are in place that generate security alerts. And about 32% of security professionals ignore those alerts because so many are false positives. And in fact, is public cloud a solution to this? Is it more or less secure? And the answer really is neither or both. And let's step back and take a look at the layers of security, the model that we have for security in the cloud. And we get a clear picture about how the responsibilities are shared. So if you consider the host level, you have the responsibility as a customer cloud to schedule OS patching and perform validation afterwards. You need to harden the configuration by disabling unnecessary services and overriding insecure default settings. And at the application and data layer, the responsibility is entirely yours. Your applications need to be patched and properly configured. You need to monitor logs for anomalous behavior. You need to run vulnerability scans and pen testing and remediate the deficiencies uncovered. And last but not least, you need to manage the storage of your sensitive data, whether they need to be encrypted at rest or in transit. In the shared security model, the areas inside of those blue outline boxes, thankfully, are all managed by a best-in-class provider, in this case, Microsoft Azure. They have the resources, the teams, and the skill to ensure the physical security and foundation services. And in short, the area shaded in red are the areas I outlined that you as an organization have to take responsibility for securing or outsource that to a responsible third party. So the last of those 3 top cloud adoption challenges I want to cover here is cost efficiency. And organizations legitimately have a lot of concerns, and there are stories aplenty in the news about cost overruns and missed expectations around costs in the cloud. And cloud provides incredible flexibility, such as to experiment without risk of unnecessary long-term CapEx commitments. However, accompanying your newfound agility comes fiscal responsibility. And without that, your CFO is going to be mighty unhappy. So we advise firms to follow these fiscal best practices. First, right sizing. If you can use a machine instance with less RAM, why pay for one with more? You pay for what you consume. If users run some systems largely during 8x5 business hours, schedule some resources to be shut down after hours, just like turning off the lights when you leave the room. Employees are like my kids. They leave a trail of wrappers everywhere and they never throw anything away. And those 3-year-old machine snapshots that you have laying around, those can be disposed of, because if you don't, those old unused resources add to recurring costs. Consider using platform as a service only available in the hyperscale cloud, like Azure SQL. Consider that rather than your own dedicated SQL server for cost efficiency. Microsoft just released Azure reserved instances, and you can save up to 72% by committing to a term versus just paying as you go per minute. And if you have low priority machines, test workloads, development, there's a great capability to pay as you go and at a low cost for those non-production workloads. There's a class of VMs for that. So there is a number of challenges we covered. Let's talk about overcoming them. And in our view, this all speaks to the criticality of proper planning to answer the business questions and have successful migrations and smooth operations. So let's drill down into planning. And Synoptek's approach to cloud planning is to conduct a cloud readiness assessment. This is that undervalued first step that prevents teams from providing leadership with answers, and more importantly, prevents poor decisions that result in project failures and cost overruns. A cloud readiness assessment should analyze a customer's IT systems to advise what workloads even make sense to move at all, and to which public cloud, whether it's AWS or Azure or perhaps even private cloud. A proper cloud readiness assessment should qualify all the suitable workloads, looking at business suitability of each of the applications for the cloud, the financial ROI for migrating applications, and the technical feasibility of them. And what you see here is the series of steps that Synoptek performs that results in a well-understood effort, a clear understanding of the resultant costs to operate in the cloud. And I want to share some of the finer points that such an assessment you could consider performing yourselves. So first, you should gather a complete inventory of the compute and storage resources you've allocated today. Understand the application versions and the operating system versions on each. And you see an example of that before you. Next, you're going to want to map the dependencies between the resources. For example, you'll want to know if one SQL server services both SharePoint and an application server. Why do you want to know this? Because these dependencies might provide you the ability to migrate groups of dependent systems in separate migration phases rather than all at once. Collect both the technical considerations that come up as well as the business considerations. For example, are there licenses that won't transfer to the cloud? And conversely, if you have Microsoft Software Assurance or a Microsoft Enterprise Agreement, that not only has licensed mobility, but it gets you funding for third-party assistance. Where does any sensitive data exist on your system that requires better protections? And are some systems a candidate to move to PaaS, as I talked about, or even SaaS like Office 365? And does doing so overcome or create technical obstacles? And you should view your consideration of these workloads about suitability across these two axes. There's the business value to the organization, and then there's the technical suitability. So low business value, hard to move because it's on an old operating system. Maybe that should just remain where it is on premise and live its life, versus the opposite in the upper right, a sweet spot for the cloud. And again, cloud can be Azure, it can be Office 365, it can be Salesforce. So as you're moving out of owning data center and being in that business, consider those various destinations. As you're examining your inventory, look at what the bottlenecks are, understand the CPU used and the actual RAM, so that you can right size, which could mean an adjustment to maybe better machine instances and sizes when you move into the cloud for better performance, or less costly than you have allocated on premise. Once you know what compute and storage resources you're going to need, because you've gone through an inventory and a right sizing, then you can do this mapping to the cloud vendor SKUs. And there are an abundance of instance types, but you'll be able to make these intelligent decisions to get an accurate to-be model and inventory of the cloud vendor SKUs, which allows you then to tabulate a cost assessment. If you're comparing against Azure and AWS, you'll have to do a similar exercise against both cloud vendors and come up with your total cost there. So when we do this as a Microsoft Gold partner, we do this in conjunction with Microsoft. And I want to introduce Manish Dahl here to talk about that a little bit. Manish?
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, thank you, Miles. So as you saw and you heard Miles going through all the phases of the cloud migration, cloud readiness journey, this journey is not alone covered by Synoptek team only. Microsoft team up with them shoulder to shoulder to help them complete this for their customers. And it's not, we have not done this first time. We have done it several times for the Synoptek customers. Basically, every step, what is required for Synoptek's customers is to go to complete the cloud journey. We back and we give the back support. We participate in that on those activities with Synoptek team to make sure whatever we do in terms of designing the new solution, in terms of planning ahead on the business side and technical side, we do it together. As an example, few customers where I worked with Synoptek, we were able to fly them into Bellevue offices or Redmond offices in Seattle area, where Synoptek team was there, my team was there, and customers team was there. We collaboratively worked together in a discovery and design workshop where we did lots of whiteboarding and put our design there together and were able to kick off the pilot/POC for the Synoptek customer. Our responsibility is not finished there yet. We make sure when Synoptek is working with their customer, if they need any help, if there is a technical block, if there is a technical roadblock, if there is any other assistance needed, I will be able to bring that assistance for Synoptek team to make sure the onboarding on the cloud for their customers is as smooth as possible. Back to you, Miles.
Thanks so much, Manish. At the end of this process, this cloud readiness, you'll understand the business and technical considerations. In fact, you'll have the clear answers, well-reasoned, analyzed answers, and a thorough plan. And that is what leadership's looking for, the answers. Where are we going? What will it take? What's the effort? What will it cost? Manish, let me hand it back to you.
Thank you, Miles. So you heard what we can do together. And then the question comes, why Azure? Why Azure is so prominent that everybody's catching lights on that? This map basically tells how many Microsoft Azure regions are available across the globe. These small dots and big dots are the regions available through it. So let me tell you one thing, what the regions are. One region is built with multiple data centers, and those data centers are all from generation 3, 4, 5 type of generation of data centers. And each region is as big as at least 10 football fields. So you can imagine how big of one region is and how many are built. And let me advance the slide here. Thank you. If we count the total region across Azure, we have 38 Azure regions, which is way more than any other competition in the cloud business for us as of today. Next slide, please. Why Azure is getting so much momentum? Because we own those data centers, which I just showed you in the last slide. We do not let anybody else manage it. All Microsoft full-time employees run those data centers. We own end-to-end life cycle of their data centers. As a result of that, you see the adoption numbers in industry, how big the Azure is kicking in the adoption for the consumers. So many subscription per month. I'm not going to read every number to you, but just going to pick a few of this here. 5 million organizations using Azure Active Directory, our authentication engine, which is fully integrated with all the Azure data centers. New releases in last 12 months, more than 500 plus Azure services and Azure regions in the multiple locations. And every day there is a new releases coming up with in form of an Azure infrastructure service or in form of Azure PaaS services. So we have the best-in-class infrastructure to support your workloads in in the public cloud. We don't stop our story right on the cloud side, on the public cloud side. We are the only vendor, cloud vendor in the industry who has a true hybrid cloud story in the market. We can extend the Azure in your premises to give you the complete true hybrid cloud solution, which Synoptek is very big in building those types of scenarios as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now you heard the stories of about the Azure data centers and the new innovations every day we are building on the Azure data centers. How about the connectivity between the Azure data center? We are the biggest network, commercial, let me say, we are the biggest commercial network in the world, which is connecting all the Azure data center to our own dark fibers. 14 million miles of dark fiber, which is fully controlled and owned by Microsoft, all quality of service, the consistency, the redundancy, the resiliency, everything is fully baked into it. So we can replicate, we can help you build the data center across, we can help you replicate your workloads, we can help you build your workload across the globe without or with very minimal latency. Let's go next. So here was the question in the beginning, what Miles put it on. What is that picture? This picture is nothing but we're laying down the fiber and under the sea to connect that. And if you pick up the number, what the bandwidth of this fiber is, it's a 160 terabyte throughput of the fiber. So we have the network in the world which we can connect all across the world. The next, please. There was a time when we talk about Microsoft, the perception was, oh, it's all Microsoft products. Not anymore. In Azure, we support all type of products, including from the infrastructure, database, middleware, app frameworks, application, management tiers, DevOps tiers, with the various third-party and the open source platforms. We are extensively putting big teams to build that ecosystem where we support a whole bunch of infrastructure and the mechanism to support all these third-party products on Azure infrastructure. So if your workload or if your solution requires Linux with Red Hat or SUSE, or with integrating with the MySQL, with the cache database or any other type of database, we are the only platform we have already qualified with most of the vendors to run their product on Azure. And the efforts of qualifying these products is keep going and multiplying day by day. Any vendor who has their product, we are extensively working on the pilot and POCs with the new vendors to make sure we qualify their product fast enough for you to support and make your move to the Azure cloud. Next, please. And the biggest ask from all the time when I talk to the customers is, oh, we are dealing with compliance. We are dealing with healthcare. We are dealing with federal. And it is a big pain to build and support the infrastructure which can host the workload meeting the compliance requirement. Microsoft Azure is qualified and certified for all of the major certification required to host the compliance business. It's not only limited to US. It is widespread. You talk about any country. You talk about Japan, JSOS. You talk about China certification. You talk about different part of the world, Europe GDP, or you talk about US, FedRAMP, FIPS, and HIPAA, PCI. We already have that offer, and we can completely support your workload without compromising on the compliance world. With that, I'll hand over to Miles back, and I'm happy to jump in as needed.
Thanks, Manish. Tyler, you want to wrap this up for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Manish and Miles. Great presentation today. So a lot of times we get asked, why is Synoptek successful operations? So Azure's breadth and depth of services alone is really best maximized by a company like Synoptek, a Microsoft Gold Cloud Platform Partner and Microsoft Cloud OS Network Partner, and a 5-time Talking Cloud Top 100 Cloud Services Provider. By automating the application discovery across physical, virtual, and cloud environments, Synoptek is able to help organizations reduce the time of their migration planning cycles by up to 70%. Synoptek has more than 300 IT professionals in over 20 cities across the nation and in Canada as well, offering a range of professional cloud services that really help address all of the areas of the cloud journey, the planning, the building, the actual migration of workloads to the cloud. So when you partner with Synoptek, you're really able to tap into deep expertise in Azure or in any other public cloud environment that will help you avoid or address many of the common problems associated with enterprise cloud adoption that we discussed earlier. So today we want to give the audience something to walk away with as well that will help them really start their Azure or cloud journey. Many of the most significant problems that we see take root in the migration and planning phase. Even though this is the most essential phase of the cloud journey, you need to make informed decisions based off data. So Synoptek helps fill that gap here with their planning and migration service, which will provide a complete visual of your entire existing IT infrastructure, including application discovery, application dependency, cloud readiness, sustainability, and infrastructure design, and a cloud migration roadmap builder. So for the first 3 organizations on today's webinar, we are offering this cloud assessment and planning service as a complimentary offer for attending today's webinar. So with that, I want to thank everyone again for attending today's webinar. We will have a recorded version of this available for all attendees, and we'll be sending that out shortly. Thank you again.